pens these letters of Paul. And you can now look at these arguments from within Jewish argumentation, not as historically people have looked at these as an argument against Jewish tradition. In fact, when we do that, we realize Yeshua is arguing within rabbinic principles. He seems to understand these principles. They seem to understand that he knows what he's doing. And he's actually critiquing and helping create applicable Torah for people. So that's good. It's going to come into play here today. One of the biggest ones I mentioned last week. We can use that tool to kind of leapfrog what I think has been probably the biggest distraction. We're going to leapfrog the argument that the Gospels come and the New Testament comes along and dismisses all of Torah law. One of the biggest areas we see this is in the dietary laws. Did Yeshua abandon the Torah? Did he teach that all foods are clean? Right? And then later in Acts 10, which is what we're going to deep dive, when we put this argument in its proper place, we can then step back and realize, oh, there's a deeper and a more beautiful meaning to this story. And we haven't seen it because we get entangled in kind of this errant idea. So that's what we're looking at. Acts 10, the meaning of Peter's vision at the place called Joppa or Yaffo. My objective here is to debunk the argument that this is a dismissal of biblical dietary laws. The other part is to propose a theory of what I think this is about. And that's what we'll build to. So what is the main, you can just throw out what the traditional views are, or what your views are, whatever. What are the main takeaways from Peter's vision? And again, we're talking about the animals coming down on a sheet, and he's hungry, and he says, no, Lord, I haven't eaten anything unclean. What is the meaning of that story? Yeah.
Do you want traditional Christian teaching or the actual?
What are some of the things you've heard?
So in Christian tradition, that is where everything was claimed to be clean.
Right.
You can eat anything, and it kind of gets rid of the dietary laws.
Right. Torah has been done away with. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so in the text itself, it self-interprets and says that it's okay for Peter, the Jew, or Jews in general, to dine with Gentiles, at least under certain circumstances.
Right, and that's later. We see this kind of discussion. Peter and Paul have a disagreement on whether or not he should be acting that way because he gets up and he leaves. That kind of ties into what we talked about. The school of Shammai had made kind of social separations. Peter was adhering to them, and Paul's saying, no, we're not doing that in this community, right? But by and large, would you say most of the time you hear this vision is about food being made okay, right? Right, yeah. Right. And usually people will take a few passages. They'll take Romans 14. They'll take Mark 7, the hand-washing incident. All of these, when you stack them together, it seems to provide this coherent, three-pronged approach of you can eat whatever you want. As a rabbi, I used to have, my first rabbi said that's wishful thinking. We will go into why that is. As always, I go to gotquestions.org. It's a great site to come up with what I think are wrong answers, just so I can prove that this idea does exist. They say the purpose of the food laws was to make Israelites distinct from all other nations. After this purpose had ended, Jesus declared all foods clean. Mark 7:19 is the verse. Later, God gave the Apostle Peter a vision that implied formerly unclean animals could be eaten. And that's what they do. They stack those together. And the idea is there's no more distinction between Jew and Gentile. And that's kind of how the church has taken that. And now because there's no distinction, there's no need for the Torah, the commandments, and all food is clean, right? So nice little conclusion there. Unfortunately, that is not how the apostles act throughout the rest of the New Testament writings. Of course, in Acts 15, the apostles meet and they assign extra food categories to Gentiles. So they didn't get the memo. We also talked about last week, the idea in Mark 7 is not about food, really. It's a springboard to a different conversation. So here are the logic problems. People always try to take Mark 7 and point to this forced conclusion that dietary laws are no longer binding. Because Mark 7's not about biblical dietary laws, and we know this now, we talked about some of these examples, it falls into the rabbinic discussion category of ta'am mitzvah, or maybe even criticizing a gezerah. If you weren't here, ta'am mitzvah is remembering what the origin of this mitzvah is about. It's great that we can go very high and lofty with our observances, but what's the essence of it? It's being a good person, not, and in that particular case, not gossiping, not slandering. It's spiritual stuff. So do the physical things, but remember the weightier matters of the law, that we have spiritual purity to maintain as well.
What's the literal of ta'am?
Taste. It's like the taste of the mitzvah. What is the inner essence of why we're doing this thing? I'm washing my hands, great. I'm rinsing bowls and cups, great. But if I'm not being a good person, then I'm neglecting the real cause of separation between God and myself. And that's what Yeshua is teaching in Mark 17. Food just becomes sort of the context of the conversation. And of course, as we know, maybe someone doesn't, the parenthetical, thus declared all foods clean in Mark 7 is a later addition. Someone added that later. We don't really know who. Could be hundreds of years later. We don't know. It's not original. Which steers that entire discussion down this path, right? And then lastly, as I said, the apostles have expanded. They actually did the opposite of that. They didn't nullify and then eat whatever. They actually assigned Gentiles extra food categories. 3 of the 4 extra categories in Acts 15 are food related. So what do? Those are some problems we have to overcome. I want to go ahead and start by reading Acts 10 just to kind of refresh us on what we're reading here. And I'm going to go through most of it, but probably not all of it. Okay, Acts 10:1. And you can follow along if you want, if you have an app, or if you're reading the Bible. There was a man in Caesarea named Cornelius, a Roman army officer in what was called the Italian regiment, Roman regiment. He was a devout man, a God-fearer, as was his whole household. He gave generously to help the Jewish poor and prayed regularly to God. One afternoon around 3 o'clock, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming in and saying to him, Cornelius. He stared at the angel, terrified. What is it, sir? He asked. Your prayers, replied the angel, and your acts of charity have gone up into God's presence, so that he has you on his mind. Now send men to Joppa, a Mediterranean city in Israel. Bring back a man named Shimon, also called Kepha. He's staying with Shimon, the leather tanner, who has a house by the sea. As the angel that had spoken to him went away, Cornelius called 2 of his household slaves and one of his military aides, who was also a godly man. He explained everything to them and sent them to Jaffa. The next day, about noon, while they were still on their way approaching the city, Kepha went up, Shimon, Peter, went up on the roof of the house to pray. He began to feel hungry and wanted something to eat. But while they were preparing a meal, he fell into a trance, in which he saw heaven opened, and something like a large sheet was lowered to the ground by its 4 corners. In it were all kinds of 4-footed animals, crawling creatures, and wild birds. Then a voice came to him, Get up, Kepha, slaughter and eat. But Kepha said, No, sir, no, Lord, absolutely not. I have never eaten food that is unclean or treif. The voice spoke to him a second time, Stop treating as unclean what God has made clean. This happened 3 times, and then the sheet was immediately taken back up into heaven. Kepha was still puzzling over the meaning of this vision he had seen when the men Cornelius had sent, having inquired for Shimon's house, stood at the gate and called out to ask if the Shimon known as Kepha was staying there. While Kepha's mind was still on the vision, the Spirit said, 3 men are looking for you. Get up, go downstairs, and have no misgivings about going with them, because I myself have sent them. So Kepha went down and he said to the men, You were looking for me. Here I am. What brings you here? They answered, Cornelius, he's of a Roman army officer, an upright man and a God-fearer, a man highly regarded by the whole Jewish nation, and he was told by a holy angel to have you come to his house and listen to what you have to say. So Kepha invited them to be his guests. Let me just see, because it's a very long chapter. Okay, we'll come back. I think we get the point. He sees this vision, and in the interim, it does seem like it's about food, right? He's hungry and he sees these unclean animals. That becomes kind of the pretext for this vision. And he says to God, I've never eaten anything unclean or trafe. And then God says, whatever I have made, don't call it unclean. Right? We'll come back to how he understands this, but it seems like he doesn't exactly take it as a dismissal of food. He doesn't go down and eat. We're not told anything about him eating seafood. He's right there on this like coastal town. That would have been the big moment, right? If you're changing Torah law, he goes downstairs and he goes to the marketplace and buys something, if it's about that. I don't think it's about that. His initial confusion indicates that there is a deeper meaning to this story. You should keep digging. 2, he understands that it's not about Torah dietary laws. He eventually makes that clear. As David said, he attests to what this vision is actually about. But this is what I'm interested in. There are visible patterns and themes in this story that triggered me to realize, and others as well, this might be a rabbinic story. This might be a midrash. This might be a midrash on some events that happened, but the way it's woven together, there's another story here. And if some of you have been around for our Woman at the Well story, we saw that seems to be written in a midrashic form. This one does as well. This has the same pattern. So what we're going to do is step back. What are some of the themes you've seen from some of your midrashic background? What words stood out to you? What things seem interesting or focal points in this, if it's a rabbinic story?
4 corners.
4 corners is a big one. Yep. What does 4 corners usually mean?
From all over
Yep.
the world or nations or,
Both the time, the number, and just the reference. That is announced. Same.
Yep. The time of prayer. Right. Yeah. So there's a lot that. So 4 corners, the times of prayer. Cornelius seems to be praying according to the Jewish tradition, the temple tradition. We'll start off with this one. 4 corners, as Courtney said. 4 corners is actually, it's in the Bible, and I'll try to show you where it's in the Bible and then in some traditional ideas. This one's very easy because we see it quite often. I will gather you from the 4 corners of the earth. Isaiah 11:12. Part of the Messianic era is the redemption of the exiles, bringing the exiles back to Israel. We are seeing that in our time, the last 20 years or so, or actually you could go further than that, but it's really picked up. Right? People are going back to Israel. Interestingly, as anti-Semitism rises, that increases. So we're seeing very prophetic things. We're seeing this play out. The numbers make use of this all the time. And the text actually says it, I believe, 2 or 3 times. It keeps saying 4 corners, or it mentions 4-footed, right? If we're coming from the 4 corners of the earth, then the 4 corners in the rabbinic language is a reference for the nations. So I'm going to pull you from the nations, right? The word I have here is kanaf. For a corner is the word kanaf. We say it in the... Right. It's a wing, it's a corner, it's a garment. It can mean all of those things. Yep. Now, we'll talk about that in a second, but we say it in the Shema. Talking about the tzitzit and the kanaf. Yep. So already in the Jewish tradition, corner has multiple meanings to it. It's not just a corner or a garment. It could easily just as well say wing or garment. In fact, that's where the Midrash plays. What if we read this word this way? It could mean this, right? For anyone who's observantly Jewish, 4 corners also represents the idea of tzitzit. We know what tzitzit are, right? Everyone knows. So in Numbers 15, we're told Jewish men are to wear tzitzit, fringes on the 4 corners of the garment. Right? Again, 4 corners of the garment. You see this word repeating. So corners, the 4, it's the nations, but it also means, like this observance that we're supposed to do every day. Malachi has this messianic prophecy of my name will rise as a son of victory to bring healing in its corners. So now we have this idea. This is corners and garments. The way that this word is used, it already starts to point to messianic tones, right? So we're seeing this garment, this 4-corner garment descending. Peter's garment here has some possible ways we can tie this to the tradition. And it's an important one because very few of these are this way, but the tzitzit, the mitzvah of tzitzit, is actually a symbol for all the commandments. If you wear tzitzit, it's as if you've kept all the commandments for that day. So it's a uniquely special one, right? Okay. What are some other themes in Peter's story? Focal points that animals, right? The unclean animals. This is a fascinating one because all throughout the Bible, think about the tribes. When Jacob is talking about the tribes, he's discussing them in terms of an animal. Dan is a snake, Judah is a lion, right? You see, the nation of Israel is often represented in some ways as an animal. Sheep are Israel. Goats equal sinners because they're usually a sin offering. So the Yom Kippur tradition.
Also wanderers.
Wanderers, yeah. The Yom Kippur, we send a goat out to the wilderness, right? The scapegoat. 2 goats technically are part of that because it's carrying the sins of the nation. All right, so you see this idea. Predatory and unclean animals are often referred to as the pagan nations because they're often hostile to Israel. They're often problematic, or they kill Israelites in large numbers. Daniel represents 4 great beasts, 4 great kings. So here we get a double, right? We get the 4, these great nations from all the different, like, from the world, and they happen to be the ones who go against God and his people. So Daniel 7, in the rabbinic tradition, they really dial into what each of those beasts mean, which nation each of those beasts represent. So here we are. We already have 2 midrashic ideas, and they're connected to the nations, right? The 4 corners of the nations. And now the 4 beasts, the nations are represented by animals. So the unclean animals almost become another symbol of the non-Jewish world, all the pagan nations of the world. Here's one example from Genesis Rabbah, one of the oldest midrashic compilations. The nations of the world are likened to beasts of prey, while Israel is likened to sheep among the 70 wolves. And again, remember sheep and the goats. We see that idea. When the Son of Man comes before him, will be gathered all the nations. He will separate one from another as a shepherd separates sheep from goats. Now, this is an idea that the whole world will be sorted like animals, right? It's a very common tradition. Tracking? All right. And then there are some animals which get unique care in the rabbinic tradition simply because they're a puzzle. One of them are pigs. So often the Roman Empire is considered in the Midrashic tradition to be like a pig. So very unclean animal. And the reason is there are a number of reasons. We'll go through a couple of them. But the Romans have kind of this persona about them that they conquered the world, they're on top, and then they really were at that time. But there's an argument, we'll talk about this as we get closer to Lag BaOmer. A couple of Rabbi Akiva's students are sitting around and they're talking about the Roman Empire. And Rabbi Yehuda says, look at the actions of this nation. What an incredible nation. And he's pointing to all the development and technology. And one rabbi just chooses not to say anything. It's probably wise. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he says, these people do everything for themselves. They're not doing things for the world. They build marketplaces for prostitution. They build bridges so they can tax everybody. And he makes a couple critiques of Rome. You don't necessarily have free speech in the Roman Empire. He gets chased out. Long story short, the Romans have this persona about them where they seem to be on the outside pristine, but on the inside there's some real spiritual darkness going on there. Here's the example, Leviticus Rabbah. And the pig, this is Edom. Of course, we've talked about this before. Edom is often a euphemism for Rome because you can't, as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai learned, you can't openly talk about the Roman Empire like that. So you can call them Edom. It's understood that it's Rome. It does not chew its cud as it does, obviously the kosher animals do. It does not praise the Holy One. It also curses and blasphemes and says, whom do I have in heaven, right? So it's a kind of blasphemous nation. Sorry. Another one is this. The pig, Rome, when it crouches, it stretches out its hooves to say, see, I'm pure, because it does have the split hooves like other animals. And the rabbis are playing a trick on this. Right? It's like it seems to be an animal that's okay, but on the inside, it's not. Right? So the Roman Empire is very antagonistic and problematic. Okay, so animals are mentioned here. Descending from heaven. This is fascinating. So there's this idea that this rabbi is walking down the road, and it's in the Talmud, and he comes across two lions. Now, you know how this is. Like, you walk down a neighborhood, and you realize this dog is out front, and it's not on a leash. Or if you're jogging, you realize, like, do I turn around and go the other way? Do I run? Like, you have to figure it out. He realizes there are these two lions, which is apparently a hazard when you're walking around in Israel at that time. And he's trying to figure out what he's going to do. And all of a sudden, two large animal thighs descend from heaven. And one goes to the lions, and they're occupied. And I can just picture this rabbi carrying this thing. And he goes to the Beit Midrash, and he said, like, is this thigh kosher? Or is it a non-kosher item? Which animal did this come from? Like, where did it come from, right? And the rabbis say, certainly it's kosher. A non-kosher item does not descend from heaven, right? You see the connection here? This is almost verbatim to the idea that Peter is building on. And then the rabbi, just to make sure, because I'm sure they were hungry, he's got this nice, probably perfectly roasted, like, he says, what if a donkey had descended? Would that be kosher, right? And the Rabbi Abahu says, the sages already told you, no non-kosher item descends from heaven. So there are times in a midrash when you're making 2 and 3 degree connections. This is a 1-to-1 for me. This is the very same idea of these unclean animals, these treif animals, coming down from heaven. And God saying, don't call what I've made clean, unclean. Right? There's another thing here, though. There's another piece to this. And just before I show this, this is how the ancient audiences interacted with this material. They didn't read it at a surface level. They had all these ideas in the back of their head, in the back of their mind, connecting the dots. And the way that the author pulls them together, they're kind of tying these strings and they're braiding this story together with different elements. Right? Are you tracking, though? Mm-hmm. We're making sense of this, right? What about the location? What about the location of Yafo? Where else do we see Yafo?
Jonah?
Was that?
Jonah?
Jonah. What's the theme of Jonah? We do this for Yom Kippur.
Going to the Gentile nation of Nineveh.
What was that again?
Going to the Gentile nation of Nineveh.
Right. So Yom Kippur features the reading of Jonah because it's about the redemption of the nations. The nations, the evil nations, the pagan nations, the ones who have waved off God, who said, we don't want the Torah, they're in their Yom Kippur liturgy and in the Messianic era, they come back to God willingly this time. They're not forced. They're not threatened. They're not scared. So something better than Jonah, technically, right? We're seeing this idea. And that happened at Yafo as well. That's where Jonah boards a ship and tries to kind of get out of there. And turns out you can't do that. But you see that another theme here is this ancient city, Yafo. Jonah starts to flee, and he went to Jaffa, and that's where he got his ship, and that's where he also meets, if you remember, Gentiles. And they are aware of the God of Israel, and they actually start making offerings to God, and it seems like they have this big moment of repentance.
In that section, they never actually prayed to other gods, and they specifically says that they feared the God of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
I thought
The guys on the boat, yeah.
Right. Because that's the irony of the Jonah story, is that the Gentiles in this nation, these so-called pagans, are getting it right. And Jonah's the one who's obviously not.
I'm saying that you've got this guy who's a tanner who's a God-fearer as well, and praying just like these fishermen were praying.
Right. And so I would also say, too, what else, this might be digging a little bit deeper, but what else is the story of Jonah connected to? What other biblical story?
I mean,
Noah.
You're close with the boat.
Noah.
Noah. Noah. And what does Noah have? Animals. All the world's animals, right? So in the Midrash, Jonah and Noah are connected with this kind of this rudderless boat that God's connecting. So that's another dimension. I didn't add it, but in the back of your mind, if you're reading Jonah through that tradition, it's connected to Noah and animals. So there's a lot of background in this story already. Of course, here's in Acts 10, 5, 8, and 8. Send men to Yaffo and bring one Simon, who's called Peter, and he sent them to Yaffo. And it's mentioned again. It's mentioned a number of times, actually. So we're seeing the themes here. Yaffo is not accidental. It connects us to the redemption of the nations, the themes of Yom Kippur, the Messianic era. It connects us with this kind of new emergence of the God-fearer. Not only a Gentile who recognizes God, but one who is respected by the Jewish community, as it says in Acts 10. He's giving, he's praying, he even gets a vision from God. Like, this is the Messianic era when all people are given this kind of revelation of God. Okay. The next one is the Roman soldier. So it goes out of its way to kind of put Cornelius at a high level. He's not just a regular lowly soldier. He's from this like Roman cohort. He's from the heart of Rome, right? He's a centurion. He's in charge of many people. He is he's not a nobody. In fact, he doesn't have to go on his own. He sends people, right? That's significant. In Zechariah 8:22, it talks about this idea that at the time the Messiah is coming, the Messianic era, powerful nations will come to Israel, seeking God, entreating God to be healed, right? They'll come from all over the world, but the powerful nations will actually come to God. And that's significant. We're going to revisit those verses in a second, but this is as powerful as it gets in this time. Cornelius is from the heart of the Roman Empire. And he's not just coming to Peter, he's living this life somehow at that level. Okay. He's a prototype. Cornelius says, "See, I sent for you at once, and you've been kind enough to come." This is important because this does two things. This blows away the narrative that the commandments are done away with. Listen to what he says. "Now, therefore, we are all here in the presence of God to hear all that you have been commanded by the Lord." So not only does Peter tell us later in this passage that it's not about food, Cornelius is coming here to know what has been commanded of Peter by the Lord. That doesn't sound like an anti-Torah message to me. That's someone who is trying to go further, take this a little higher than he had been doing it. What's really interesting to me, though, does this connect with any other prophetic passage that you can think of? Think of these themes.
It reminds me of the concept of a shaliach. With Abraham, angel came to Abraham as a messenger. And then an angel comes to Cornelius, and then he sends his representatives to Peter, and Peter is then asked to be a shaliach for Yeshua back to Cornelius. So it's like this big circle of representatives.
Right.
From Hashem, from the nations to, it's a sort of a wild circle of messengers.
Yeah, in the background, you definitely have this shaliach idea, or this agency, this connection, which does actually dovetail into the passage I want to show you here. Here's what I see. Okay. I'm just going to read this from Zechariah 8. I'll start at verse 20. Adonai Tsevaot says, "In the future, peoples and inhabitants of many cities will come. Inhabitants of one city will travel to another and say, 'We must go ask Adonai's favor and consult Adonai Tsevaot.' I'll go too. Yes, many people from powerful nations will come to consult Adonai Tsevaot." Moving forward. "When the time comes, 10 men will take hold, speaking all the languages of the nations. They'll grab a hold of the cloak, the garment, the corner of a Jew, and say, 'We want to go with you because we have heard that God is with you.'" This seems to me to be a midrash on Zechariah 8:23. You literally have someone from the powerful nation taking a hold of a Jew. We see the garments, right? Animals equal nations. The most powerful, the most problematic nation is grabbing a hold of the kanaf of a Jew. The kanaf is in there. That's the sheet coming down. And saying, we want to hear what God has told you. This is the picture of Zechariah 8:23. I think Acts 10 is a midrash on that passage from Zechariah. Brilliantly written, creatively written. We've just been distracted by the anachronistic idea that it's about kosher laws.
Connected to Genesis. I remember I read one part where I believe it was Isaac, which is Isaac, I believe, or it was one of his son. I think when he left and he was sent because, no, I'm sorry, yes, because his brother Isaac thinking he was going to kill him, and then he went somewhere away, and his uncle didn't want to let him go because he knew that he had the blessing of no one. And then when he even left, other nations didn't want to let him go because they knew that he had the anointment came with him wherever he go. It was not the place. It was about him being present with the Almighty all the time, whatever he did.
Jacob.
Yeah, with Jacob.
Yeah, Jacob, yeah, there are a number of things you can tie into this. I've just kind of selected the first easy to get us to this point. I encourage you all, continue to dig in, see what's there. The language for me is a one-to-one. It even ends in Zechariah with the Gentile having the last word of what they hope to achieve from this. That's how Acts 10 ends here. Cornelius says, tell us all that you've been commanded. So with that, so here's what I see. The vision of the animals on the sheet, the garment, the corner, hints at the nations who are being restored. It's a picture of the Messianic era. Peter serves as the proverbial Jew of whom the nations seek to connect with God in Zechariah 8, right? He's that person that is keeping the commandments. Which, because if someone is wearing tzitzit, and the nations are going to find a Jew who's wearing tzitzit, and grab a hold of them, and say, let's learn about God, well, that has to be an observant Jew, someone who's keeping the commandment of tzitzit. If you're not keeping that commandment, is this metaphorical? Does not mean what it says, right? But here we have this picture of Peter, who is an observant Jew, and Cornelius comes and says, hey, I want to know what God has commanded you. Teach me. This story, instead of people using it as a reference for nullification of Torah laws, it's actually a very pro-Torah story. All of the gospel stories are, in the end, very pro-Torah. There are none that I've seen and read that walk away from Torah. In fact, they strengthen.
It says 10 will grab onto the tzitzit of one Jew. It's almost like a minion is being created out of that. They're not Jews, but like almost like a Gentile minion is like who were gravitating towards Torah in that way. So.
Right. So I think that factors into the centurion, because if you think about the number of a centurion, you have another connection. I didn't write that one down, but I saw it. It's 100, a cent, right? Such a 10. And why does that matter? Right? So again, there's a lot more written here. I've just kind of selected the easiest ones to get to. So it's a very pro-Torah story. In the end, ironically, again, this whole kosher argument has been a late distraction. It's been a mistake. And it causes us to miss what's going on in the text. Okay, so pro-Torah, like many other stories in the apostolic writings, it hints at the Messianic kingdom from a very deep Jewish eschatological perspective. It's in no way assuming that something has been done away with. It's playing out the prophets. It's showing how these prophetic passages are playing out. And it's pointing to that future. So that's what I see. Any questions?
Since you have a tie between Jonah, Yom Kippur, bringing the nations, and this spot right here where like Cornelius and the Gentiles are being brought in. And this leads into Acts 15, where like what actual parts of Torah are most explicitly applicable to Gentiles. Is this, in your mind, basically a secondary, an application of Torah to the nations from like a Sinai experience perspective? Like it's that flowing out over time, and you just have to have these types of things layered in here to actually have a reason to layer into the existing Yom Kippur to understand how the Gentiles plug in, or is it just embedded in tradition already? Does that make sense?
I think it's embedded in the tradition. If I understand you, maybe I don't.
I'm wondering if you're seeing additional components fleshed out, or if it's just primarily the echoes of the tradition, as I'm asking.
Oh, okay. So I think I understand. So I think that they're writing into this material as sort of a because I think we talked about this in John. John is written to an original audience to be read over and over again, possibly to a Torah cycle, the triennial Parsha cycle, so that it's evidence of things happening now, but foreshadowing things coming. Does that make sense? I think that's what we see here. And just to add to kind of where you've taken me here, I almost wonder what time of year it was written and what the cycle of the Haftarah and the Torah portion would have been. Does that correspond? Is there a connection between these passages there that's also a dimension? You see that with Paul sometimes. Yeah. Paul will write in something, and you'll get a timestamp of what time of year it was, around the Passover, for instance, and then you'll see the Midrash from the Passover library in his writings also. So Paul's not making things up. He's actually, like many of us do, you're reading the week's portion, and you're speaking on those because they're fresh in your mind. Everything's revolving around it.
I guess it's not rainy season, I guess, and probably not the hottest part of the year either. So if I had to wonder, if I had to pinpoint it, I would venture a guess that there's a spring sometime after the rain stopped, but before the heat came.
Yeah, and it might tell us that in the text. I think he goes from Jerusalem to there. Good.
Well, I think that it's not about food. It's about that the gospel is Jewish. He says, and you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or visit anyone of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. So when I was asked, I came with that objection. And then when he sees the vision, he's like, what does that mean? And then it means that you shouldn't call anybody from the nation uncommon or unclean. And then he goes on, God shows no partiality, but in every nation anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable, as the word that he sent to Israel, preaching the good news of peace through Messiah Yeshua, the Lord of all. And then he goes on to say what happened in Judea and Galilee from the baptism of Yochanan and how God anointed Yeshua of Nazareth and the Holy Spirit, and he goes on to give them the gospel to the Jew first and then to all the rest of you. So what he's saying is the gospel, the good news, the Lord, the Messiah is now for the whole world, and all people are given the invitation to be redeemed.
Right, and that's the picture of right, beautiful. That's the message of the Messianic kingdom, is that the nations were scattered around the time of Babel, right? Babel was kind of the break point when God said, I'm keeping this nation of Israel, or Abraham, right? And everyone else, I'm scattering you, and I'll come back to you in the Messianic era, is effectively what's happening. Babel is that point. And then it even says, Zephaniah, I think it's Zephaniah, when the Messianic kingdom comes in, all the nations will speak one language again. Which is why it says it in Zechariah, people of many languages will come back, because it's a tikkun, it's a repair of Babel when their languages are scattered. But they have to come there on their own. It can't be forced. You can't force convert people. They have to come on their own. Cornelius says that. Was that? Yeah, start learning Hebrew. But so yeah, there's a really good point in that it's a recapitulation, but it's kind of reversing, getting us back to that Messianic era, which, to your point, that blows away the model that Israel has been replaced. There is absolute distinction. Cornelius gets that, and he got that from where? Living it out, seeking God, and a vision. So any replacement theology is also blown away in this idea. So this idea that it's going back to the gotquestions.org, this removal of distinctions, the removal of kosher laws, completely wrong. And I love using them because you can count on them to have those traditional interpretations. This is actually the opposite.
That's why like replacement theology and the message that it's not just error, it's an evil. Because it's perverting the truth of God and his whole plan. We see what the plan is. It is to it's not to separate people, it's to bring people together in his way, not in this other way that's foreign. So, and that's, the church says the same thing. They say, we're supposed to be one. We're all supposed, your Jews are supposed to be with us, but they want it their way, not the way that God laid it out to be, which is they're turning it on its head.
Yeah, it's a problem because you're not living out the model Cornelius lays out in this verse. One last point too. Bev brought up the idea of it's unlawful for a Jew to talk to a Gentile. So that's not in the Bible. Where did we learn in the past few weeks? Where did that come from? Where did that unlawful idea that they can't associate come from? It was the school of Shammai.
Yeah.
So the school of Shammai laid out those 18 principles. I kind of glanced over it quickly. Those 18 principles were just protective measures the school of Shammai laid in at that time to keep the spiritual impurity of pagans away from what Israel was trying to develop and cultivate. The school of Hillel didn't agree with that. A lot of the apostolic community is actually more in the school of Hillel. So Peter's not wrong, but it also shows that he was observing the school of Shammai's principles, at least up to that point.
Yeshua himself said, this is not for you at one point. Like he himself dealt in both schools. Like he observed Hillel and Shammai at times. So of course his Talmudim are going to do the same thing.
Sure. Yeah, Yeshua is very pro-Shammai, and it's a protective measure. He said don't go near these Gentile cities because there's spiritual impurity. So that's where that line comes in. That's that historical piece people miss. People often say, oh, the Jews just don't like Gentiles. No, that was actually more of a Pharisaic argument, back to what we said in the previous weeks. Yeah, it's a gezerah, right? It's one of those ideas a rabbi can lay out a protective fence. But if you noticed in the book of Acts, God says, I'm going to send someone to you. Go talk to him. He knew Peter was in this position, but he kind of like preempts that. So there's little hints in there when you put these pieces together.
Because one, he was in Yaakov, and the other was in Caesarea, which is, if you're in a bus, it takes not too long, but if you're in that time, you're not going to get there even if you're in a chariot, which they probably had given their rank, but it would have still taken a while to get there. I'm just wondering how long and when they actually set out and when the connection of the timing was, because one would have had to, for him to be there when he went downstairs, the timing would have had to have been, they would have had to have gone earlier.
Yeah, there's a spot in here. I think it even says 3 days, which is another midrashic cue. Yeah, we'll come back to it. There's a lot more in this. We could probably spend weeks on Acts 10. There's a lot of depth in it. I saw a hand over here, though.
I just want to say that what you say, what is evil, is true. I've been, as a raised Catholic, I met pastors and priests that they actually teach you the wrong way. And not knowing the truth. And when you read it, they make you even interpret it the wrong way.
Yeah.
They make sure that you understand their way. And yes, I now, when now the Father, I found His mercy, He told me the first time, and I remember, this, my spirit will lead you to the truth. And the more as I was going here, I felt that like everything, it was just doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me. And I feel very uncomfortable. It's kind of like you grew spiritually and you're looking for the truth. That you know it's out there, but you don't know how to find it. And you have to just be patient and pray so much until He leads me here. So I think I feel so calm and peaceful knowing now the truth and being revealed in my face. And, it's amazing. And I want to thank you for that.
Good. Amen. Yeah, so that's what we're doing here. We're trying to revisit these. It's humbling. We have to unlearn to learn. Just to recap here as we close out, it's not about food. it's about it's a redemption story, but not just any redemption story. It's a midrash of Zechariah when the nations come to a Jew and take hold of the garments and say, "Take us to God. We want to learn more about it." So that's what we got here.